listening to the Intrepid radio program with Scotty Roberts. Intelligent talk.
Happy Tuesday evening, folks. This is Scotty Roberts. Welcome to my show. This is the Intrepid radio program right here on the Odyssey Radio Network. That's ODYSY1.com. Come on over to the website, find out all the goodness that's Odyssey Radio, and at the same time, look for all the different places where you can hear this show in its archived format. And you can come on over, as I say every night, to my YouTube channel and watch this show in video as you listen to the simulcast in audio, or just come on over to the YouTube, watch the video, join the live chat room that's going on right now during the show. One way you can do this, if you can actually just turn down the sound on the video and listen to the audio over at Odyssey and watch the chat room. So there's ways you can do this and have fun with it and enjoy it. At the same time, when I say that, I say join the chat room. That's where all the Intrepids hang out during the show. The hardcore, the inner circle, if you will. They hang out in the chat room, and you can join the conversation. Sometimes they're talking about the show that's going on right now. Other times they're on all kinds of other stuff. So come on over and join the family. Enjoy the friendships that you can make over there. Have a good time. That's at youtube.com/Mr. Scotty Roberts. And we're not going to start off with any politics tonight. I'm not going to hit current events. We're just going to go to a topic tonight. We kind of hit it in last night's live show. Toward the end there, if you had to bail a little early, we just kind of reintroduced what we were talking about last week and where we left off. And that is the genesis of Genesis, the origins of the book of Genesis. And to me, and I think I know I talked about this last night. Some of you may not have heard some of this, but if you don't understand me, you won't understand why I talk about these topics that I like and that I enjoy. What you first have to understand about me is that I want there to be substance to the things I believe, or I want to look at the things, historical things that I hear, and I want to know what's going on. I want to know the background story. I want to know what's happening here. I'm just turning off the sound on my dinging phone. I want to know things. And so when I was told in the church and seminary, Bible school, about the Genesis story, I wanted to know more about it. And as I researched, found that the writer of Genesis, the Garden of Eden story, the fall of man's story, all the different stories throughout the book of Genesis, that there were older versions of these stories that he most probably borrowed from. You could say plagiarized. Did plagiarization exist back then? Yeah, it did. Not in the way we have it today. But he borrowed source material. And if I believe that Moses was indeed the author of the book of Genesis, and I believe he borrowed his stories, where did he borrow them from, and how would he have known of them? Well, remember, the first 40 years of Moses' life, he was a prince in Egypt. He was a man who bore 92 royal titles. He was a well-educated man. And something he would have learned is the various religions around the world. And something that existed at that time was the stories that came from ancient Mesopotamia and ancient Sumer, ancient Akkad, and the stories. And we've talked about these many times. And so I believe that he either borrowed that information and created something out of whole cloth, in other words, something fictional, or this was part of his belief system, and he incorporated that into and changed the characters and changed Enlil, Elil to El Shaddai, El Elyon, Elohim. He changed the names of Enki, Ea to Yahweh or Jehovah. And so why did he do this? Why did he adapt those things into a different language or a different understanding? And so there's always been this overlapping of these things that I've wanted to get to the core of and understand them. And so tonight is no different. And what we have talked about in last week, when we started this whole topic of the Genesis of Genesis, was talking about the Enuma Elish, the Babylonian story, the ancient Mesopotamian story of creation and the Garden of Eden and things like that, and the fall of man. And in 1902, there was a Bible scholar named Friedrich Delitzsch. We mentioned him last week. I just want to recap this a bit. He offered one of the most famous discussions of the Bible and the Enuma Elish in the first of his Babel und Bibel lectures. And he delivered those before Kaiser Wilhelm II. And in this lecture, Delitzsch solemnly announced that Babylonian sources preserved more ancient and thus more original forms of full cycles of stories that we find in the Bible. So he's saying, you've got the biblical tales, but there was something that came before that, these more ancient forms, or the original forms of the story. And he suggested that the biblical authors had transferred directly to Yahweh, the God of Israel, the heroism of Marduk, who was the god of Babylon, and as known from the Enuma Elish. And he offered a handful of biblical examples. And we went through a couple of those last week, but including Job. There's a passage in Job, a passage in Psalm, several passages in Psalms. And the passage from Job 9:13. God does not restrain his anger. Under him the helpers of Rahab lie crushed. Now, if you remember way back to the beginning of this, we were talking about how God opened up Rahab, or destroyed Rahab, and how he destroyed the Leviathan, the sea monsters, and so on, how this came through both accounts. There you've got a very brief mention of it in the earliest chronological book of the Bible, the book of Job. And it was you who drove back the sea with your might, says Psalm 74, who smashed the heads of the monsters in the waters. It was you who crushed the head of Leviathan, who left him as food for the denizens of the desert. It was you who released springs and torrents, who made the mighty rivers run dry. And Delitzsch showed his audience a cylinder seal that bore a picture of Marduk, with one large eye and one large ear, and he's standing on a dragon and holding a weapon in his right hand. Now, this seal, which had been discovered by German excavators, was cited by Delitzsch as the background for Isaiah 51, 9 through 10, and Job 26, 12 through 13, both of which describe the Lord striking down the sea monster Rahab and piercing a snake or a dragon. In Isaiah it says, wake up, clothe yourself with strength, O arm of the Lord. Wake up as in former times, as in antiquity. Did you not smash the proud one? Did you not wound the sea monster? Did you not dry up the sea and the waters of the earth? And so on. And this was a passage that was the passage speaking of creation, which goes back to the Enuma Elish, talking about how God, Marduk, had crushed the Leviathan, the sea monsters. Now, according to Delitzsch, the priestly author of the creation account in Genesis, we're talking about Moses there, in contrast to the authors of the Psalms, Job, and Isaiah, he tried to remove all these mythological traces from his text in Genesis, yet he wasn't entirely successful. Trace elements of the Babylonian myth could be found throughout Genesis, said Delitzsch. For example, the light splitting the deep, and in the Hebrew, the tehom in Genesis, it recalls Marduk splitting the watery goddess Tiamat. See that similarity there? Now, he talks about God splitting the water, the deep, but he doesn't mention, the Genesis writer Moses doesn't mention the sea monster there. He's cleansed that out of the account. So Delitzsch was not saying anything new when he brought all this up, but he created a sensation throughout Europe and America by introducing the connection between the Enuma Elish and the Bible to the popular consciousness, from the Kaiser in Germany all the way on down to the common man. So people reading their Bibles, he was really promoting the idea this is a much older story than was recorded in Genesis. So he also gained attention and support for his subjective anti-Semitic, anti-Christian insinuations that Mesopotamian religion was on an equal, if not higher level than that of the Hebrew Bible, and that the Bible contains no religious truth of its own, but is only an accumulation of shallow literature drawn from Babylonian texts. And this is where I think some of these guys go off the trail a little too much. They're not just presenting information as they find it, they're trying to disprove the veracity of the biblical account. And so when he had this, and he was anti-Semitic, he was anti-Christian, and so that was the goal he had, was to really kind of kill the Bible for people. And so if the generation preceding Delitzsch used archaeological and Assyriological discoveries to prove the truth of the Bible, from his time on the same evidence would be instilled in demonstrating the Bible's inferiority. That's what he was after. That's what he was trying to do. And you can find that. You can pick up a book. There's a book called Mad to See the Monuments, and it was published in 2001 and written by Stephen Holloway. He talks about this very thing. And so Alexander Heidel, in his well-known book, The Babylonian Genesis, offers a very clear summary of the parallels. He calls them points which invite comparison. That's what he refers to them as. Points which invite comparison. And that Smith and Delitzsch and other early scholars had detected. He said this. He said, thus Enuma Elish and Genesis 1:1 through 2:3 both refer to a watery chaos which was separated into heaven and earth. In both we have an etymological equivalence in the names denoting this chaos: Hebrew, Tehom, and Akkadian, Tiamat. Now, you can see the similarities even in the beginnings of the words. I don't claim to be pronouncing these perfectly. So both refer to the existence of light before creation, of the luminous bodies. Both agree as to the succession in which the points of contact follow upon each other. And in both cases, the number 7 figures rather prominently. And turning to the poetic writings of our Old Testament literature, we find quite a number of passages which, like the story of Marduk's fight with Tiamat, treat of a conflict between the Creator and the various hostile elements. So Heidel adds to this list the divine nature of the participants in creation. Creatio ex nihilo, creation out of nothing. And it's a polytheism and monotheism in respective stories. It was this primeval chaos, this primeval darkness, creation of the firmament, creation of the earth, creation of the luminaries, creation of the plant and animal life, creation of man, the words of the creators, divine rest, the 7 tablets, and the 7 days, and the general outlines of events in the Enuma Elish, and Genesis 1 through 2. But Heidel concludes this. He said, the similarities between these two accounts, the Enuma Elish and the Genesis story, are really not so striking as we might expect. In fact, the divergences are much more far-reaching and significant than are the resemblances, most of which are not any closer than what we should expect to find in any 2 more or less complete creation versions. So since both would have to account for the same phenomenon, and since human minds think along pretty much the same lines, which might come from entirely different parts of the world, and which might be utterly unrelated to each other. So what Heidel does consider striking is an identical sequence of events as far as the points of contact are concerned. So in other words, of all the points mentioned that I just went through, only a few are really highly similar. But these particular points appear in the same order in the respective compositions. So this indeed seems to be a really strong argument in favor of this interdependence on each other. Well, especially Genesis being dependent on the much older Enuma Elish. So in discussing the possible connection between Marduk and the God of the Hebrew Bible, Heidel noted that the idea of a primeval war between God and the sea is an idea that was born in the West and imported into Mesopotamia. So the Bible would more likely have borrowed it from closer neighbors than the Babylonians. So here Heidel relies on this evidence in myths discovered at Ugarit on the Mediterranean coast of modern Syria, a decade after the First World War, and ipso facto unavailable to Smith and Delitzsch, so because they came before. But proof that this was indeed the case comes from the words of the Bible that it uses for sea monster. On the 5th day of creation, in Genesis 1:21, God creates Tannin. And it says in Genesis 1:21, God created the great sea creatures and every living and moving thing with which the waters swarmed, according to their kind, and every winged bird according to its kind. God saw that it was good. And so he created these Tannin, often translated as sea serpents. And the same creature appears as Tin or Tunan in the Ugaritic myth. Surely I fought Yam, and we covered this a little bit last week. Surely I fought Yam, the sea, the beloved of El. Surely I finished off River, the great god. Surely I bound Tunan and destroyed him. And then there's the biblical Leviathan in Psalm 74, has its parallel to Itin or Leitin, who battles God in another Ugaritic myth. When you killed Leitin, the fleeing serpent, annihilated the twisty serpent, the potentate with 7 heads. You got to remember that word from last week, potentate. We don't say that too much. We don't use that too much. The potentate with 7 heads. The heavens grew hot and they withered. So, kind of pulling this all together, Assyriologist Wilfred Lambert, who is preparing the eagerly awaited authoritative edition of Enuma Elish, notes that many of the parallels between the Babylonian poem and the Bible are so common throughout Near Eastern literature as to be insignificant. Catch that? The things are so common that they could be insignificant. And Lambert, his book is A New Look at the Babylonian Background of Genesis. It's a journal of theological studies. He published that in 1965, so 55 years ago, and republished with 2 postscripts. And there's more information, so you can find that. And he also it refers there's Moshe Weinfeld's transliteration and Hebrew translation of Enuma Elish, published by the Hebrew University of Jerusalem in 1973. So you can look at these things as these ideas and the notes on the numerous parallels between individual lines and specific Bible verses. So, all of this to say, the watery beginnings of the universe have parallels not only in the Mesopotamian creation myths, but even in the Egyptian and the Greek texts, and thus can't be evidence of particularly Babylonian influence. They're too early for that. So the splitting of the waters in Genesis on the 2nd day is uniquely parallel to the splitting of the aqueous Tiamat in the Enuma Elish. And although the splitting of other substances is well attested in Sumerian, Akkadian, Hittite, Egyptian, Greek, all these different myths as well. As for the third day, Lambert finds a Mesopotamian parallel to the separation of the sea from the dry land, but it's not from the Enuma Elish. The most important parallel Lambert finds is within the seventh day, the Sabbath. Man is created in the Enuma Elish to give rest to the gods. If so, both Enuma Elish and Genesis 1:1 through 2:4 climax with this divine rest. And all told, Lambert sees the connections between Genesis 1 and Enuma Elish as relatively few in number. But that's the big hot point. So they both attest to the resting of God. So as recent scholarship is making very clear, simplistic comparison between Enuma Elish and the biblical tradition, as if the Bible were directly dependent on the Enuma Elish and it alone, it's patently untenable. And yet there's some kind of a relationship. The Enuma Elish appears to be one of a range of sources that the biblical authors drew upon. It's obvious that Moses, in his writing of the book of Genesis, drew upon the Enuma Elish. He knew of it. He had studied it. He took sources from it. And although Delich and Smith dismissed this borrowing as naive and mechanical, you know what? I believe something far more thoughtful and thought-provoking was taking place. The literary character of the Enuma Elish itself offers an example of how and why the biblical author drew on this source. Get this, Enuma Elish is on the surface a unified work with a clear, consistent plot and message. Yet it, too, adopted and assimilated numerous ideas and literary themes from earlier sources. There was a proto-religion. Well, he said, that was a question my old friend Micah Hanks asked me. He said, do you believe that if Moses pulled from the Enuma Elish, that was the proto-religion? And I said, yeah, maybe so, but maybe so even further. Maybe the Enuma Elish pulled off of other sources. How far back do you suppose that goes? If the Enuma Elish was written around, I think it was written probably around, you're looking at maybe the 4800s BCE. If it was written then, what was it drawing on from what existed before that? Remember, 4,800 years BC, add on our 2,000 years in AD or CE, you got about 6,800 years. But then you look at a place like Göbekli Tepe, that goes back 12,000 years. 4,000 years further back, almost 6,000 years further back. And you see things all over the carvings of animals. Some animals we don't even know what they are. Do they not exist anymore? Why was, and this is something we'll have to cover one of these days, why was Göbekli Tepe buried? Was it the Great Flood? What was it? So, looking at all of these, you will see that there's a notion of the creation of gods in the world that took place a long time before the Enuma Elish, and then the biblical writers stole or borrowed from the Enuma Elish.
Are you looking?
Folks, thanks for sitting there and waiting through the break. This is Scotty Roberts. We're back, and you're watching my show, the Intrepid radio program, right here on the Odyssey Radio Network, ODYSY1.com. You're also watching the video simulcast on my YouTube channel, and hopefully joining the live chat room that's there over at youtube.com/Mr. Scotty Roberts. Now we're talking about the comparatives, if any exist really, between the Enuma Elis and the biblical account in Genesis. The Genesis of Genesis. Where did Genesis start? Where did it get its birth? Was it the Enuma Elis? Did it go further back than that? This whole notion of, this is kind of where we left off, of the God in the first segment. This whole notion of the gods and the world by sexual intercourse and birth is already found in Sumerian sources. Young gods who prevent their parents from sleeping, and indeed divine unrest and sleep deprivation are central themes in the Atrahasis myth. Remember the Tale of Atrahasis, the king who pleads to his god, Enki, to deliver them from bondage to the Anunnaki gods. And Enki Ea comes down through the Apsu, serpent's den, and we know that story. And so this divine rest and unrest and sleep deprivation are central themes to Atrahasis, dating to the old Babylonian period, the first half of the second millennium BCE. So with roots in the Sumerian myth of Enki and Ninmah, Marduk in Enuma Elis has 4 eyes and 4 ears. This reminds us of Ezekiel's chariot vision. But more important, it's a brother statue. I'm sorry about that. It's a bronze statue that's found near Ishkali. And this is ancient Neribtum in Iraq. So it's in Iraq. And dating from the old Babylonian period, presenting an identically endowed deity. If this statue is not Marduk himself, it's without a doubt a god of the same species. And this 4 eyes, 4 ears. You can look at this Jacobson. Remember we talked about him a while back? His book Treasures of Darkness. And it's the mysterious 4-faced statue. And he wrote about this in the Journal of Ancient Civilizations back in 2001. But the sequence of events of giving the tablets of destiny to Kingu, danger threatening the gods panic, the appeal to several gods in search of a champion who will defeat the monster holding the tablets, the eventual transfer of the tablets of destiny to the victorious champion, has this close parallel in the Akkadian myth about the god Ninurta's defeat of the Anzu bird. And the 11 monsters in Tiamat's retinue are also parallel to 11 monsters who fought alongside the Anzu. And this is Stephanie Daly, and I had her book. It used to sit right here. It's probably in a different cabinet, where she did a modern translation of the cuneiform tablets, where I originally read all of these stories. And she's got a book, Myths of Mesopotamia, You can find that in some of her books. And Anos, the standard Babylonian epic of Anzu. That's the State Archives of Assyria cuneiform. You can read that too if you're into that stuff. You know, what was very interesting, there's a great story about Stephanie Daly's book, where I was reading the Tale of Atrahasis and all about Enki. This is a few years ago. This was when I was writing my, I'm trying to think, I picture in my head where we were, the house we were in, and I believe this was when I was writing the book on the Nephilim. And I remember reading this. It's 2:30 in the morning, and I'm sitting at my elbow with a little book light, and I'm reading this book, and I'm reading the Tale of Atrahasis. And I looked over at Rainey, and I said, "Rainey." She's like, "Huh?" I said, "You awake?" "Yeah." And I said, "You got to hear this." She sat up on her elbow, and she was like, "Okay, what?" The fact that she actually sat up on her elbow is very telling. But she sits up on her elbow, and I read her this segment from the Tale of Atrahasis. And I said, "That's the old cuneiform translated into even more modern idiom, modern English, a better understanding of it." I said, "Isn't that amazing, the language they use?" And she had her chin on her elbow, and she said, "Absolutely stunning," she said. And I said, "Thank you. That's all. You can go back to sleep now," which she did. So I did mention in the dedication, I wonder if I can, hold on. I think it's this book. Let me see where I put it. Right here, the Nephilim. I think it's this book where this is what I said about my dedication to this book. I dedicated it to Rainey. And let's see if I can find it for you. There it is. Well, it's maybe not everything there. It says, "Thanks for Rainey" in the dedication. "For Rainey, thanks for loving me through the process and putting up with my vacant pillow on those dark, late nights when the muse came calling." And I might be thinking a little more of my dedication in Reptilians, which I may not have that here, where I went into talking about how she had to listen to my stories in the middle of the night. And she, if you will give me a second, I may be able to find that and read that to you. To me, it's just interesting. It's fun to review because it's, while we're talking about all this heavy-duty stuff, this involved our relationship, the stuff that was going on with Rainey and I as I was writing these things. And so I think you might enjoy hearing about it. Here it is. Let's see. It's going to be in, here's the, I've got to look at the full manuscript. So let's open this up, and we'll just see if it's there. And it's trying to open it for me. There we go. All right. In my that's my preface. No, I don't think it's there. This is the preface of the Reptilian books, and then it goes into, yeah, I wrote it later. So sorry about that. I thought I had it, and I thought it was going to be a fun little thing to insert in here. Yet I don't have it all here. Let's see. Hold on. Maybe I do. Hold on. How is this for riveting radio? Author preface. Maybe this is it. Nope, that's not it either. Well, I'm striking out. I've got the introduction. I've got questions. I got a table of contents, reviews, revised. Phil Coppin's foreword to the book. But I don't have my foreword to Rainey. It's somewhere, and I don't have the book on the shelf. But I did say something like in my dedication to Rainey, and might have even been in my preface, I said something about how she had signed up for normal, but this is what she got. And I thanked her for allowing me to read her cuneiform texts in the middle of the night. So all of that build up for that little nothing. But there you go, folks. Sometimes relationships are all about reading cuneiform text in the middle of the night to your spouse. So, and I do want to say at the same time that if you want a nice what's the word I'm looking for? The COVID shutdown. If you've got a shutdown, or if you're isolated, or you want to be together, you got to spend some time together with your partner. That's a good date night. Break out the cuneiform texts of the Tale of Atrahasis, and you can alternately read verse after verse of the breakdown of that story, and I think you'll find it really enjoyable. Moving on. So we talked about the 11 monsters, and we talked about we're talking about the Tale of Atrahasis here. So the war between Marduk is where we're at, with his army of the winds and Tiamat, who embodies the sea. It has parallels in earlier Western myths about a conflict between a storm god and a sea god. A Middle Bronze Age silver goblet from Ain Samaya in Israel. I think that's how you pronounce Samaya in Israel. Ain Samaya in Israel is decorated with a similar mythological scene that the late Israeli archaeologist Yigael Yadin interpreted as the slaying of Tiamat by Marduk. And the scene is similar to one on a clay plaque from Kafaj in eastern Iraq of the Isin Larsa period, the late 3rd to 2nd millennium BCE, and it shows Marduk slaying Tiamat. Now, creating the cosmos by splitting the body of defeated Tiamat reflects Sumerian beliefs, according to which the world was created by splitting various primeval cosmic elements. And creating man by mixing blood from a slain rebel god into the body of a man is rooted in accounts found in Atrahasis and Enki and Ninma. And in the Enuma Elish, Babylon is built by the gods who mold bricks. A similar description about the building of Nippur is found in a Sumerian hymn in honor of the city. And finally, Marduk's 50 names are somehow related to 50, the symbolic number of Elil, the chief god of the Anunnaki in the Mesopotamian pantheon. So, the author of the Enuma Elish is deliberately attributing to Marduk and Babylon acts ascribed to other gods and cities in other myths. So this is where we're saying Genesis is drawing on Enuma Elish. Enuma Elish is drawing on older myths yet. And they all have pretty much the same story they're telling. And so the author is stealing the thunder of these gods. He's undermining them in favor of Marduk. And when Marduk receives Elil's 50 names, he in effect becomes Elil. And that's Marduk. Marduk becomes Elil, the chief god of the Anunnaki. And when the gods build Babylon instead of Nippur, Babylon becomes the new religious capital. And most important, when Marduk defeats the 11 monsters that Ninurta fought in the ancient Anzu myth, Marduk, son of Ea, Enki, the god of Eridu, of which Atrahasis was the king, in effect usurps Ninurta, son of Enlil, god of Nippur. Enuma Elish is a story about Marduk that challenges a story about Ninurta, and it reflects a political, theological competition over primacy in the pantheon and supremacy of the capital city. So all these tales of Marduk, spawned further debate, and there was an ancient Babylonian commentary praises Marduk. An Assyrian commentary satirizes him. So it appears to have been an alternate Assyrian. Yeah, they even wrote, by the way, you think about that, they wrote their own commentaries back then, thousands of years ago, on these stories. So an alternative Assyrian version of the least parts of the Enuma Elish, known only from some fragmentary manuscripts found at Ashur, offers a competing version of events by replacing Marduk's name with Ansar, and a name given to Ashur, the chief god of the Assyrian pantheon. So the wall reliefs in the Akitu, the New Year's house, built by the Assyrian king Sennacherib, depict Ashur, not Marduk, riding in his chariot and vanquishing Tiamat. So you can see these ancients all borrowed their gods from each other. And this is why I raised any questions at all in my own books when I saw that Elil later became Elohim in the Canaanite version. How Enki, became Yahweh. And how all these similar stories were brought down from the Babylonian versions into the Hebrew version written by Moses. And so the Near East is full of all these conflicting claims to supremacy of this or that god or city over all others. Look at Jerusalem, the prime city. And so the Bible is part of this polemic. The biblical authors borrowed from foreign creation stories in order to make the best case possible for Yahweh, the God of Israel. They were participating in a contemporary international debate on the basis of data considered basic and agreed on by all. See that? You see where this is a little mind-blowing? All these different cultures had all their names put onto was probably a common event in the past. And they did that to claim primacy for their God over the others in all these ancient cultures. And the ancient Near East was full of all these conflicting claims to who was superior. And so, for example, the pre-existence of water may have been considered a scientific fact back then, common knowledge. In Enuma Elish, this water is personified as Tiamat. In monotheistic or non-mythological Genesis 1, the watery deep is just water. Here, the biblical author is trying to correct the record. So you see that? The Hebrew author is saying it's God, saying the water is there, but I'm not calling it by its mythological terms. I'm just telling you it's water. God created water. The view of the world is as a bubble with water above and below, and was commonly held scientific truth at the time of the Bible. So it doesn't need to have been borrowed from a particular literary source. And this water had to be parted somehow in order to form the bubble. And the authors throughout the Near East had to decide how, within the framework of their own beliefs. Marduk does this by physically splitting Tiamat, the personified waters. Genesis 1 has God ordain a firmament in the theologized waters by simply speaking. In Enuma Elish, divine sleep deprivation is a constant problem. Tiamat and Apsu can't sleep, so they try to kill their noisy kids. I've been there. I understand that. That's not a unique thing with the gods. Oh my God, will you go to sleep? It's like, have you ever heard, I'm sure some of you had. Go look it up if you haven't. It's the book, and pardon the language, it's the book Go the Fuck to Sleep. It's read by, the one I like, it's read by a few celebrities, but was Samuel L. Jackson reading it. the birds have gone to bed. And, your pillow's where you lay your head and this and that. And he said, now please, go to fuck to sleep. And it's all the rantings as the night goes on of children not going to sleep. So, yes, Tiamat and Apsu can't sleep, so they try to kill their noisy kids. And so man is created to give the gods rest. And Babylon is built to provide this resting place for gods in transit on a cosmic journey. And so this idea is rooted in the Mesopotamian myths of Enki and Ninmah, or the Tale of Atrahasis. And in Genesis 1:1 through 2:4, God ceases and sanctifies the Sabbath. But in Exodus 31:17, a priestly passage connected with the author's creation story in Genesis, God puts his heart at rest and is satisfied. And I have no idea how to pronounce this word that I've got written here, but Wayenapas. That's satisfied, put to rest. And so it was common belief in the ancient Near East that a high god in a pantheon, had to defeat the sea and create the world. A god, whoever he might be, had to act in a godly manner and do godly things. But the priestly author of Genesis 1 gave the story a whole new spin. Rather than having God vanquish rebellious monsters, he had God create them. So compared to Psalm 104:25, over here is the deep wide sea, which teems with innumerable swimming creatures, living things both small and large. So God didn't have to defeat them, he had to create them. And this is where God creates Leviathan to play with. And so thus showing God's superiority from the very start by just speaking it into existence. And so in light of all this and more, it's impossible to accept today in a simplistic manner the claims of Smith and Delitzsch, which we covered, that the biblical authors took the Babylonian story of creation, that is, Enuma Elish, and simply applied it to Yahweh, the God of Israel. The specific parallels are fewer than originally thought, and even the best ones aren't even entirely certain. But the Bible and the Enuma Elish are products of the ancient Near East, and each accepting common beliefs and knowledge, and each developing them in their own unique manner. So they really should be studied by modern scholars as mutually illuminating, not only for what they hold in common, but for the unique ways in which each presents their common heritage. And so I think it's a very interesting study to find that the author of Genesis goes all the way back and grabs those events, yet strips them of their mythology. Now, in so doing, places his own mythology on them, but he strips them. Now, we read one of these tablets last night, but let me read a couple of these accounts for you. And this is probably going to take us to the end of the show, but I want you to hear these. This is tablet 4 and 5 of the Enuma Elish, and I want you to hear these. The Lord Marduk trampled the lower part of Tiamat. With his unsparing mace he smashed her skull, severed the arteries of her blood, and made the north wind carry it off as good news. His fathers saw it and were jubilant. They rejoiced, arranged to greet him with presents, greeting gifts. The Lord rested and inspected her corpse. He divided the monstrous shape and created marvels from it. He sliced her in half like a fish for dyeing. Half of her he put up on the roof to the sky, or put up to roof the sky, drew a bolt across and made a guard to hold it. Her waters he arranged so that they could not escape. He crossed the heavens and sought out a shrine. He leveled Apsu, dwelling of Nidimud. And the Lord measured the dimensions of Apsu. And the large temple Eshkala, which he built in its image, was Eshara. In the great shrine Eshara, which he had created as the sky, he found cult centers for Anu, Elil, and Ea. And it goes on a bit. But then you have tablet 5. It says, he fashioned stands for the great gods. As for the stars, he set up constellations corresponding to them. He designated the year and marked out its divisions. Apportioned 3 stars each to the 12 months, which he had made plans of the days of the year. So he founded the stand of Neberu, to mark out their courses. Any relation to Sitchin's Nibiru? Maybe. I don't think so. I hadn't looked into that. Neberu, Neberu. And so he founded the stand of Neberu to mark out their courses of the stars, so that none of them could go wrong or stray. He fixed the stand of Elil and Ea together with it, opened up gates in both ribs. He made strong bolts to left and right. With her liver he located the zenith. He made the crescent moon appear, and trusted night to it, and designated it to the jewel of the night to mark out the days. Go forth every month without fall in a corona, at the beginning of the month to glow over the land. He, Marduk, put into groups and made clouds scud, raising winds, making rain, making fog billow by collecting her poison. He assigned for himself and let his own hand control it. He placed her head heaped up, opened up springs and water gushed out. He opened the Euphrates and the Tigris from her eyes, closed her nostrils. He piled up clear-cut mountains from her udder, bored water holes to drain off and catch the water. See, they thought all these little details out in their mythology. He laid her tail across, tied it fast as the cosmic bond, and the Apsu beneath his feet. He set her thigh to make fast the sky, with half of her to make fast the sky. With half of her he made a roof. He fixed the earth. He, and then there's some blank spots in the cuneiform, he, the work, made the insides of Tiamat's surge, spread his net, made it extend completely. He, and then another blank area, heaven and earth. And that's from Stephanie Daly's Myths of Mesopotamia. Good book to get, by the way. And then I've got to read for you then, of course, the creation story from Genesis. And let me see, do we have enough time to do that tonight before our time is up? Let's see. No, we really don't. But you all know how that story starts. When God began to create heaven and earth, the earth being unformed and void, with darkness over the surface of the deep, and a wind from God sweeping over the water, God said, "Let there be light." And there was light. God saw that the light was good, and God separated the light from the darkness. God called the light day, and the darkness he called night. And there was evening, and there was morning, which made one day. See, I just got to double check my time here. Because as you all know, this is pre-recorded, so I've got to stay within the boundaries of my limits here. And let's see, if I started at... I just have to math this out for myself. Okay, yeah, we're just about done here. I pretty much got to wrap it up. We're going to pick up tomorrow with something a little different, but in the same thing. We're going to talk about the universal God, how the God of Israel became the God for all, at least by our Judeo-Christian roots. Okay, so we're going to come back to that tomorrow. Right now, I want you to have a good night. I want to thank you for being here. We're going to take a 23-hour break.